So, you know that feeling when you're scrolling through endless feeds and it's just a constant stream of things you could buy, things you should apparently want.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And there's this underlying pressure, right? To always be consuming something new.
Definitely. It feels like you're caught in this loop.
Exactly. Like we're sort of on automatic, reacting to every notification, every offer, without really, stopping to think.
Hmm.
That feeling, that sensation of being on this relentless consumer treadmill, that's exactly what we're digging into today, especially for you, our learner, who pointed us towards this really interesting book.
That's right. We're doing a deep dive into Emil Isaacson's Köttrobotar Utkast 2.pdf.
Yeah.
Now, for those of you listening who don't speak Swedish, that translates roughly to meet robots.
Meet robots. Wow.
Yeah, it's deliberately provocative, gets right to the heart of his argument. He's basically saying that our digitally saturated, consumer-driven world, well, it can seriously impact our well-being. That's potentially reducing us to these, well, meat robots who just mindlessly consume without real intention or fulfillment.
Meat robots. It is a stark way to put it. Definitely grabs your attention. Now, just for context, because the book sort of builds its case layer by layer, Isaacson starts by looking at our fundamental nature, this idea of an ape that doesn't know when to stop. He gets into our primal instincts and how they might be, playing out in our very modern buying habits.
Exactly. And following that, he looks at the power structures involved in the chapter called The Elite That Leads the Sheep, the Real Winners.
Okay.
So there he analyzes how marketing and advertising kind of shape our desires, influence what we end up choosing to consume. It makes you ask, who really benefits from all this?
Yeah. That's a good question. Then there's a chapter that really struck me. Everyone is on stage, no one is in the audience.
Ah, yeah, that one's powerful.
It explores how social media and this constant sort of performance of our lives online feeds right into our consumption patterns and our need for validation from others.
External validation. And then he moves on to the sheer volume of information today with, you've eaten too much information and now you have a stomachache.
Huh. I can relate to that title.
Right. It looks at how this constant flood of data and marketing messages can actually make it harder, not easier, to make thoughtful choices. It's overwhelming.
It really can be. And then there's a rather unsettling title next. Use and throw away yourself against the wall. What's that about?
Well, that seems to capture that feeling of burnout, doesn't it? And the unsustainable nature of constantly chasing the next new thing.
You mean like products or?
Both products, yeah, but also maybe even our own well-being in this relentless chase.
Oof, that's heavy.
It is. It highlights how things, material goods, and maybe even our sense of self can feel disposable in this endless cycle of wanting and getting.
Okay, so he lays out this pretty bleak picture.
He does build a strong case for the potential downsides. But the chapter we really want to focus on today, the one that offers, let's say, a potential path forward, is the final one. Du behöver inte delta i galenskapen.
Yeah.
Which translates to, you don't have to participate in the madness.
Okay, good. Because after hearing all that, I think we're all eager to hear about not participating in the madness. So what's the core message there? What's a central idea for navigating this whole thing more consciously?
Well, the fundamental message in this chapter is actually pretty empowering. Isaacson argues it's absolutely possible to find meaning and satisfaction completely outside the loop of constant consumption.
Okay.
Shifting our focus away from that relentless cycle. That can lead to a pretty significant reclaiming of personal control, you see.
Control. I like the sound of that.
He uses this really insightful analogy to illustrate it. It involves a cat and a laser pointer.
Oh, right. I remember reading that bit. For listeners who haven't come across it, can you explain that image?
Sure. So imagine a cat, right? Totally fixated on that little red laser dot, chasing it endlessly, completely reacting to wherever the light beam goes.
Yeah, cats do that.
Isaacson suggests we can often be like that cat with consumerism, just constantly reacting, chasing the next shiny thing, basically dictated by these external forces, like ads or trends.
Okay, I see the parallel.
But, he asks, what if the cat suddenly realizes it doesn't have to chase the dot? The person holding the laser is still there, the dot might still be dancing around.
The cat's not compelled anymore.
Exactly. The cat's gained a kind of freedom. It's not being controlled by the beam. Isaacson believes we can find a similar sort of liberation from the constant pull of consumer desires.
That's a really helpful way to picture it shifting from being like pulled along to actually being in the driver's seat. So how does he suggest we actually make that shift? What are the main things driving this madness he talks about?
He outlines four main categories, and they kind of overlap, that really contribute to this state of overconsumption. Understanding these is like the first crucial step to getting back some agency.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is fear of consequences. This is where marketing gets really clever, playing on our anxieties.
Like FOMO, fear of missing out.
Exactly. FOMO is huge,
Yeah.
but also concerns about our health, worries about scarcity, limited time offer, anxieties about our security. Think about how many ads basically imply you need their product to avoid something bad happening.
Oh, yeah, constantly. Don't get left behind, protect your family, act now before it's too late. It's everywhere. So how do we counter that fear-based selling?
This is where Isaacson brings in a concept from philosophy, actually, amor fati.
Amor fati, Latin.
Yeah, it means love of fate. It's this idea about encouraging us to accept, maybe even embrace, everything that happens in our lives, the good and the bad.
Accept.
By cultivating acceptance of the present moment and just the inherent uncertainties of life, we become less vulnerable to marketing that feeds on our fears about the future.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about someone who feels they have to have the latest smartphone, maybe out of fear of being disconnected or like technologically irrelevant. Practicing amor fati might mean accepting that technology will always change, finding contentment with the phone they have now, and that reduces the anxiety, making them less susceptible to the pressure to constantly upgrade just out of fear.
That's really interesting. So if you're more okay with how things are and less worried about avoiding potential future problems, you're naturally less likely to buy stuff based on fear. Makes sense. What's the second category he mentions?
The second one is what he calls we versus them consumption.
We versus them.
Yeah, it's a tactic where marketing kind of divides people into groups to create demand. Think about brand loyalties that become almost tribal.
Like Apple versus Android users.
Yeah, exactly. Or fans of different sports teams buying all the merchandise. Even lifestyle choices like being vegan or into a specific hobby. They're often marketed with this strong sense of in-group identity. And that identity is often contrasted, sometimes subtly, sometimes not, with an out-group.
So it's using our need to belong. If you're one of us, you buy this kind of thing.
Precisely. Creating identity and community through what we buy, or even what we choose not to buy, often specifically to differentiate from another group.
Sneaky. Okay, what's number 3?
The third category is striving for the ideal. This taps into our desire to achieve these often totally unrealistic ideals that we see everywhere in media and ads.
The perfect body, the perfect house.
The perfect lifestyle, yeah.
Yeah.
All supposedly just within reach if you just buy the right product or service or whatever.
Right. The endless chase for some kind of perfection that always seems just one purchase away. We can probably all relate to that pressure. And the fourth and final category?
The last one is impulse and instinct-driven consumption. And this ties back to those earlier chapters he wrote about our more primal urges.
The ape that doesn't know when to stop.
That's the one. And also the powerful effects of like intermittent reinforcement. Think about how addictive social media feeds can feel, or the buzz you get from an impulse buy. These things tap into really deep reward systems in our brains, often completely bypassing any rational thought.
Okay, so those are the 4 big drivers. Fear, you, us versus them, chasing ideals, and impulse. Now, in Chapter 6, what does Isaacson actually suggest we do to break free from this cycle, this madness?
Well, his main strategy revolves around another concept, premeditatio malorum.
Another Latin one. What's that mean?
Yeah, there isn't a perfect single-word translation, but it basically means something like premeditation of evils, or maybe more helpfully here, self-inflicted discomfort.
Self-inflicted discomfort. That sounds unpleasant. Why would we do that?
It sounds counterintuitive, right? Especially when marketing is always telling us to seek comfort and ease. But the core idea is to intentionally, voluntarily give up some of the everyday luxuries and comforts that we just take for granted.
Okay. Why?
By consciously experiencing a bit of discomfort, the thinking goes we can build up greater self-sufficiency and become less dependent on all those commercial goods and services.
Can you give some examples? What does he suggest in the book?
Sure. One example he uses is the practice of going barefoot sometimes.
Going barefoot.
Yeah. Now, he's not necessarily saying everyone should ditch their shoes forever, but by consciously choosing to go without shoes for a bit, we might gain a deeper understanding of what shoes are really for, beyond just fashion or status.
Like basic protection.
Exactly. We might realize we don't need quite so many pairs, or that the latest trend isn't as vital as we thought. It's about perspective.
Interesting. Stepping outside the usual habit to reevaluate what's truly necessary. Okay, what's another
Ex-
example?
Another one he mentions is taking cold showers.
Oh, I've heard about people doing that. Brr.
Yeah, again, it's not about torturing yourself forever with freezing water, but regularly facing that initial shock of a cold shower. It can lead to a much greater appreciation for simple things, like readily available warm water or a warm house.
Okay.
And it might also lessen our perceived need for, say, expensive coffees or elaborate morning routines just to feel awake or invigorated. The cold water does the job.
So by intentionally doing these slightly uncomfortable things, these voluntary deprivations, we kind of reset our baseline. We get a new perspective on what we actually need versus what we've just been conditioned to want.
That's it, exactly. It helps us recognize the many luxuries we often don't even notice anymore, and it can weaken the grip marketing has on us by showing us we can manage, even thrive, without certain products or comforts.
And how does this connect back to the earlier problems he identified?
Well, it connects directly. By consciously choosing discomfort, premeditatio malorum, we're actively pushing back against that ape that doesn't know when to stop, right?
Yeah.
We're setting our own limits.
Uh-huh.
We become less vulnerable to the manipulations of the elite because our happiness isn't quite so tied to their products. It eases the pressure of everyone being on stage because our sense of satisfaction starts coming more from within, not from showing off what we own.
Right. Less need for external validation through stuff.
Exactly. It helps us cut through the information overload by grounding us in direct experience rather than just reacting to external messages. And ultimately, it counters that use and throw away mentality by building appreciation for what we have and for our own inner resilience.
It's almost like hitting a reset button, mentally and physically, stepping out of the stream of consumerism deliberately to get a clearer view.
That's a great way to put it. And Isaacson is careful here. He emphasizes this isn't about becoming some kind of monk or advocating for total abstinence.
Okay, that's important.
Yeah, it's more about cultivating greater awareness, making more conscious choices, instead of just being pushed around by habits and advertising. He's quite open about his own journey with this stuff, the challenges of actually doing it consistently.
So the big takeaway from Chapter 6 really is that we actually have more power, more agency than we might think when faced with all this constant consumer pressure. We don't have to be those meat robots, just blindly consuming. By understanding the forces pushing us and by actively questioning, maybe even challenging our own patterns, we can reclaim some control.
And potentially discover deeper, more meaningful sources of satisfaction. That's the central point, really. Finding meaning outside the buy-consume cycle is presented as this really powerful path to better well-being in our kind of world.
Okay, so for you, our learner, listening right now,
Yeah.
maybe here's something to mull over. Thinking about that constant stream of messages telling you to consume. What's just one luxury in your life, big or small, that you might consider temporarily letting go of?
Yeah. Like an experiment.
Exactly, just to see what you learn about its real value to you, about how much you actually depend on it. Maybe it's a daily coffee shop visit, maybe a streaming subscription you barely use, maybe even a specific way you engage online.
It's really just an invitation, isn't it? To take a critical look at those habits that feel automatic.
And maybe discover something new about your own real needs and wants, separate from the ones being constantly manufactured for you.
A worthwhile experiment.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the final chapter, arguably the most hopeful one of Köttrobotar. We really hope this exploration has given you, our learner, some valuable insights, maybe a fresh perspective on your own relationship with consumption. Thanks so much for joining us.